Hello, my name is Dr. Tamsin Astor, and I'm here with Jeremy, which is so fun. So if you haven't caught our last conversation, I am the Chief Habit Scientist, and I partner with successful lifelong learners who are mission-driven, founders, CEOs, who want to understand how to connect their optimal expression of consistent individual habits to their big, juicy life and business vision so they can live with joy, with fun, with freedom and positive impact. And Jeremy and I were riffing the other day about pleasure and its place in this, and the kind of external motivations around you should follow this particular person because they've been really successful following a particular set of habits or habit stack, and that may not necessarily work for you.
I love it. Yeah, I think we hear all the time from successful people, whether it's even if I'm out here saying, hey, go do this. I do wake up at 4 a.m., right? Even if you go out there and say something, right? We might say something online. Somebody who's been successful in something may say something online about what is their habit stack, right? And I like to use the word habit stack. A lot of people are not as focused on their daily habits, and we like to say that that's a great thing, right? But nonetheless, those habit stacks that are tying to your big juicy why, right? Your habits in the day leading to your why, which could be a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years out. That's going to be different for every person. That's what me and you are going to talk about today. Is somebody might give you that example of like wake up at 4 a.m. But you know what? You might be a person that wakes up at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. or whatever, and it doesn't matter. It matters that yes, we want to balance listening to some other people and what they might say brings you success in terms of their habits, experimenting with those things, but then figuring out what works for me. Because I know some of my female clients, we do collaborate on how they actually do things with their cycle because they prefer that and it works better for them. And there's a lot of different ways of customizing per personality, per country, per culture, per product, per service, per lifestyle, per goal. And so I think this is very, very important.
And also the stage of your life too, which I think is another piece of it too. So you mentioned cycles, right? Like the way I did my habit stack was different when I was breastfeeding young children, was different when my kids could get up on their own, was different now that my kids have left home, right? So I think the other piece of this that we often forget is that you have to constantly be willing to step in and look, what is my big goal? What am I trying to create? Where am I in my life right now? Rather than this is the thing that one always has to do, or this is what I was doing 5 years ago. So necessarily this is the way that I need to be behaving right now, right?
100%. Yep. I think sometimes it's like somebody might be able to wake up at 4 a.m., but like one of my friends, like he's got a baby that will wake him up all night long. And so his sleep schedules are crazy off. And he's like, Jeremy, I wouldn't be able to do the schedule that you're doing. And he's not like client, we're just like friends, right? And he's like, I wouldn't be able to do the schedule you're doing. It works for you, but like my baby wakes me up all the time, right? So it's like we need to be able to customize these things for each person. And so yeah, we've said like people need to be able to experiment and test things out and really look into when you're trying a habit out, understand, try to diagnose, or even ask that person, what is the why behind the 4 a.m. wake up, for example? What is the why behind the cold showers? Because maybe you can take the why out and do it. But we want to make sure that we don't have people just rejecting an advice and saying, well, that's not customized to me, but really in their head, maybe it's an excuse to not be disciplined, right? So it's like, make sure we're still being disciplined and we're not just going to say, well, that's not for me because you don't want to be disciplined. Take the why out of why they did it and see how you can kind of customize that into yourself because the why is probably going to be what makes you successful, and maybe it's the discipline of the 4 a.m. Maybe it's the 4 a.m. gap between 4 and 8 that allows you to work before all the emails and texts come in, and maybe you have a different pocket in the day that does that, right? So understanding the why I think is going to be helpful and still being disciplined.
Totally. And what you're speaking to too is commitment, right? I was having this conversation in 2 forums this last week. One with my partner who's a therapist who talks a lot about, how we often fail to commit to ourselves in the way that we commit to other people. And I use a framework with my clients of act, analyze, commit, and track. When you are creating a new habit, you've got to be willing to look at all the pieces around it. What is the qualitative data? How do you feel? What is the quantitative data? What are the actual numbers that you're trying to shift, change, move around? And then you have to be willing to commit for a certain amount of time to see, as you say, to sort of remove the motivation, remove the why, remove the kind of, oh, this is really exhausting or boring, or why would I have a cold shower? Why would I get up that early, right? And then track it. Because if you're not willing to gather that data, you don't have anything to work on. And I think one of the things that I often see with my clients is that they have a very data-driven approach in their business, and then they kind of step back and go, well, why would I apply that to my life? And I like to work with people that are like, well, why wouldn't I apply that to my life, right? Why wouldn't I be willing to gather this data on the precious time that I have, right? So that I can show up with great presence, with great commitment, with great value, right? And the energetic focus that I choose to do that from, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people fail to commit to themselves over and over because they fail their commitment, and it's because a lot of times I see people committing to the result, and the result is past the A/B testing failure, and people aren't accounting for the A/B testing failure or something. So what we want to commit to is commit to the steps to get there, commit to the habits to get there, commit to going to the workout, not commit to I'm going to lose 10 pounds this week because you know what? Guess what? Your food diet, your meetings, and the energy that takes from a negative person or the energy from a positive person, all is going to impact it, not just your ability to go do the workout every single day, right? So we commit to the steps and habits, and we have to be realistic about understanding the latency of the results that we're going to get from those habits, because otherwise we're going to say, I committed to this thing for 2 weeks, and depending on what that thing is, maybe it actually needs 3 months, but you don't know it needs 3 months because this is the first time for you to do it. So when we talk to other people, figure out what habits are you doing, what was the latency that you saw result, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to commit to the habit for a duration that allows me to see the latency start to play out, and I'm going to account for the failure tolerance of the A/B test that I'm doing along the way, and maybe have like 50% buffer. So if I think it's going to take me 2 months, maybe now I'm going to give myself 3 months to commit to those habits.
Well, and what you're also referring to, or sort of as a sort of an oblique reference there, is to what it is that you're committing to, right? So, for example, you could say, I'm committing to running the New York Marathon, or you could say, I'm committing to being a runner, right? And committing to being a runner means I need to eat this way, I need to sleep this way, I need to exercise this way, I need to have these particular trainers, I need to have this particular community I run with, I need to learn how to run on concrete or tarmac or whatever the surface is that the race is going to be held on, rather than just holding on to that endpoint and then struggling if you can't do those little bits in between, right? So, that sort of refers back to, again, that kind of personal, energetic kind of play here, right? It's like, you're saying this, you're saying this, you're saying that, you've had great success with, you've got to be willing to step into your own arena, right? You've got to be willing to get out there and do it yourself and give yourself that space. So again, that piece around gathering the data of really allowing your unique personality to be part of it and not feeling shame, because I think a lot of people also get really stuck in a shame cycle. They try and do these things and they see people out there who are incredibly successful, and often what people present on social media or in their successful book or in their podcast or whatever is the final product, and it might have taken them 10 years to get there, right? And we're on year one of this 10-year journey, right? And so a mantra that somebody gave me once, which I found really helpful, is I'm on Tamsin time, right? So like, screw everybody else. Like, the important thing is that I'm comparing myself to myself and not to everybody else. I can gather the data from other people, I can observe other people, but ultimately I have to be comparing myself to myself.
Yeah, and I love the word you used of arena, right? Like, I think also we can say commit to your arena, right? If we can commit sometimes to the result of like, I want to go and get that marathon, right? We can commit to saying I'm a runner, but we can also sometimes choose to say, I'm going to commit to completing this marathon. But what we also want to commit to is I'm going to commit to completing that marathon while taking care of my kids, while taking care of my significant other, and make it a realistic commitment that is a commitment across 3 or 4 focused things in your life. Your career usually is one, your relationship is one, maybe your personal objective of the marathon is another one, and then if you have kids, maybe the kids one, right? Like, pick 3 or 4. Don't be across 7, 8, and 9, because that's lack of focus, it's lack of prioritization. Right. That destroys success by putting your time, energy, and resources, TEC, time, energy, capital, across 8 different things, right? It divides them down by 8, which means you are now going to take 8 times longer to succeed. So we still want to keep it to 3 to 4, but we don't need to be absolutist on choosing one goal and then compromising the relationship with the kids and everything else because you're like, I committed to that goal, because it's going to hurt you along the way. So let's commit to the arena that is us, and let's realize when somebody else gives you an advice of how to do something, they had a 10-year journey and they had a completely different arena. Maybe they didn't have kids, maybe they didn't have the significant other for the 5 years of it, maybe they don't have the same product or service, which has a whole different margin structure and a whole different fuel structure for how that company could grow and how their posting schedule was. So what is your arena, and commit to your arena and make sure it's a very focused arena, and you're A/B testing on all those different domains inside your arena.
Right, and when you're going through it in that way too, which I think is another part of one of the conversations you and I've been having in our different communities, is what is the energetic sort of state that you start this in, right? Because one of the things that I noticed as a European moving to the US over 20 years ago was the relationship between pleasure and purpose, right? And what I really felt here was this sort of Protestant work ethic kind of model, right, which makes sense how this country was started, which is, I get my paycheck Friday night, I can go out and have fun and get drunk, have sex, week off vacation. Like, the number of people you see drunk around a pool in Cancun for that spring break, it's like, I gotta get all that pleasure in 1 week, rather than what you see modeled, I think, in a lot of European countries, which is like, it's 5 o'clock, the workday's ended, let's go and hang out with our friends, right? So thinking about how can you forefront with pleasure. And I was talking to one of my coaches the other day who pays her team on Monday mornings. Same thing, right? Like, how do you set up that energy of the week, right? I think of that too. Like, rather than having a massage on a Friday night because I made it through the week, I'm like, if I have a massage on Monday morning, my client calls go better. My writing is better because I'm in that focus of what brings me into an alignment with pleasure, right? And pleasure, I think, again, in this country can get really stuck around just like kind of sex and like, ooh, like the ooh, kitty, like, ooh, pleasure. Pleasure can be, walking your dog for an hour in the morning with nobody else, right? Pleasure could be that you read real newspapers every morning. Pleasure could be that you have a beautiful bunch of tulips on your dining room table. There's no right or wrong, apart from obviously, like, we could get into a moral, ethical, discussion there. But, it's about really articulating, back to how we started, your own unique relationship with pleasure, but then using that as the focus to create your life through.
I love it. We are right at time, so I won't add my thoughts on pleasure. We will probably do another video on this, but this was so great chatting with you as always, Tamsin.
Thank you.